Rodrigo Duterte, the iron-fisted mayor, turned president, and Captain Isidro Mata, a whistleblower, lurking in the shadows, two men locked in a deadly game, where midnight executions were staged as cleanups, and every camera shutter threatened to expose a nation's darkest secrets. What began as a ruthless war on drugs hides a deeper, more savage truth, one caught on camera, and too shocking to ignore. Every few nights, always past midnight, the streets of Metro Manila would fall into a strange and eerie silence. The dogs stopped barking, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and then, just before dawn, the first body would be found. Always the same scene, a man, sometimes a teenager, sprawled on a damp sidewalk or in a back alley, hands bound behind his back, a bullet wound to the head. Beside him a piece of cardboard with words scrawled in black marker, "Drug pusher, don't be like me." These executions became so common that they faded into routine. Police officers would arrive hours later, shrug, bag the body and file a short report. Suspect resisted arrest, they'd say. Case closed. But the truth was, there had been no resistance, no arrest, only death. At first, people believed the government's story. President Rodrigo Duterte had declared a full-scale war on drugs in 2016, vowing to clean up the streets by any means necessary. His speeches were filled with threats, promises, and applause. He told officers to shoot anyone who fought back. He told drug dealers to prepare their coffins. He told the nation that the streets would be safer. And in a way, they were, just not for the right reasons. Crime statistics dropped, but fear statistics rose. Families whispered prayers every night. Mothers kept their sons indoors. Teenagers who once played basketball after dinner now stayed inside with the lights off. As the months passed, people began to notice strange details. The bodies always appeared near the same corners. There were no witnesses, no sounds of gunfire, no chase. Sometimes, CCTV cameras nearby had been turned off minutes before the killings. Others recorded only a van with blacked-out windows passing through. The police claimed these were the results of spontaneous drug busts, but the scene was always too clean. No spent casings, no overturned furniture, no struggle. Just silence. It didn't look like chaos. It looked like choreography. In a cramped neighborhood in Tondo, a young man named Luis was killed while walking home from work. He had no criminal record. He worked at a delivery company. His mother begged the officers to explain. They said he matched the description of a drug courier. No further questions were allowed. His photo, wrapped in a plastic frame, now sits on a small altar beside a candle that never seems to stay lit. And then came the first real clue that something bigger was happening. A grainy black and white video surfaced online, showing masked men exiting an unmarked van. They moved in perfect sync. No shouting, no confusion. They entered a narrow alley and returned 3 minutes later. One of them wiped a silenced pistol with a cloth. They drove off as if it had never happened. The body was discovered hours later, left where they had dropped it. The source of the video was unknown. The angle suggested it was taken from above, too high for a rooftop, too stable for a cell phone. It had to be a drone. But this raised more questions than answers. Who had recorded it? Why had they released it? And if this was just one incident caught on camera, how many others had happened unseen, undocumented, and unpunished? As the footage spread across forums and private chats, one word kept coming up: pattern. What the world thought was random violence was in fact the first glimpse into something terrifyingly organized. The video was just under 4 minutes long, but it changed everything. It showed a level of planning that contradicted every official statement given by the police. The masked men didn't hesitate. They knew exactly where to go, how long to stay, and when to leave. They moved like a trained unit, not rogue criminals or frightened officers reacting in the heat of the moment. The footage confirmed what many had feared but couldn't prove. These were not spontaneous arrests gone wrong. They were executions. The most unsettling part wasn't what the video showed, but how it was captured. The smooth elevated angle suggested it had been filmed from a drone, military-grade or high-end commercial. The footage never shook or lost focus. It hovered silently above the scene, almost like a predator circling prey. This wasn't something a bystander could have shot with a phone. It was surveillance. But whose? Authorities refused to acknowledge the video publicly. When journalists asked about it, they were told it was under investigation. Behind closed doors, though, intelligence officials were scrambling. The metadata embedded in the video file revealed a string of GPS coordinates and timestamps. It wasn't just one incident. It was part of a series. The dates matched multiple killings previously dismissed as legitimate police operations, but in the footage, no police badges were visible. No arrest procedures were followed, just execution, then disappearance. The drone itself was traced back to a unit registered under the National Police's Aerial Reconnaissance Division. According to official records, that particular drone had been marked as destroyed in a crash 3 years earlier. That raised an immediate red flag. Either the records were falsified or the drone had been quietly taken and repurposed. A forensic tech recovered partial logs from a hidden cache on the device, encrypted names, partial coordinates, and mission tags like Echo Routine and Midnight Sweep. Digging deeper led investigators to a name: Captain Isidro Mata. He wasn't a high-profile officer. In fact, his recent records were thin, suspiciously so. But before his quiet transfer out of Manila's central unit, Mata had served in the intelligence wing, overseeing drone surveillance. He had top-level access and the technical skills to operate, store and mask drone footage. Within days of the video leak, he vanished. His phone went dark. His home was abandoned. Inside his locked basement, however, authorities found something far more troubling than expected. Rows of hard drives, labeled boxes filled with printed maps, incident reports, and photographs. Dozens of flash drives, most unmarked, sat in a steel case under a loose floorboard. The files revealed systematic tracking logs of who was killed, where, when, and by whom. Some faces were circled in red, others crossed out. In one document, Mata had written, "Not random, it's a list, someone's following it to the letter." There was no sign of Mata himself, but the scale of what he had documented was staggering. He wasn't just a whistleblower. He had been collecting evidence for years, quietly watching from inside the system, preparing for something, perhaps waiting for the right moment. The leak wasn't an accident, it was a warning. And if the footage from just one drone revealed this much, investigators began to fear what might be found on the rest of the drives. Among the many files uncovered in Captain Mata's hidden cache, one stood out immediately. It was titled simply, OP. The folder was locked with military-grade encryption, but once cracked open by cyber forensics, its contents revealed the most direct link yet between the killings on the streets and high-level orders from within the government. There were documents, blueprints, photos and chat transcripts, evidence that the midnight executions weren't a side effect of Duterte's war on drugs, but part of an official calculated operation. The very name, Operation Hades, carried the weight of something mythological, dark and absolute. Inside, the structure of the operation was laid out in clear and chilling detail. Targets were categorized into tiers based on anonymous tips, alleged drug connections, or vague associations. No trials, no arrests. Tier 1 meant immediate termination. The mission objectives read like a blueprint for terror: neutralize, dispose, erase presence. There were no instructions for de-escalation or due process, only checklists to confirm elimination. But what shocked investigators most were the headers stamped on many of the internal memos. Government letterheads, full names of ranking officers, and on 2 specific orders, the signature block marked PRAD. That was the abbreviation used internally for President Rodrigo Duterte. It was protocol. It wasn't conclusive proof of his personal involvement, but it placed his office directly within the communication trail. Further in the folder there were outlines of coordinated strike schedules referred to as Echo deployment. Each was assigned to a specific team of masked operatives. The chat logs between handlers and squad leaders revealed just how deep the chain of command went. Phrases like "green light received" and "PR confirmed" the strike appeared repeatedly, often just hours before a known killing took place. In one log, a squad leader sent a chilling message: "Package delivered. No resistance. 3 down. Cardboard applied. Cardboard applied." The same cardboard signs that showed up beside bodies on the streets. These weren't spontaneous acts of vigilante justice. They were planned executions, carried out with precision, and finished with propaganda. The signs weren't left behind by angry neighbors or witnesses. They were staged, meant to paint a narrative, to make the deaths look like the inevitable outcome of a criminal life. Another document detailed performance metrics for different ECHO teams. Kill counts were recorded. Bonuses were issued. Clean hits received financial incentive. There were charts showing efficiency ratings of each unit. High-performing squads were quietly promoted or reassigned to more volatile zones. Low-performing ones disappeared from the logs entirely. Each discovery peeled back another layer of the story. This wasn't a broken system, it was a functioning one. Operation Hades wasn't a rogue initiative. It had support, funding, structure, and it had been running for years. The implication was unavoidable. The war on drugs had never been about saving lives. It was about control, it was about fear, and at the very center of this sprawling web was a man who had built his political career on promises of blood and order, but even then no one could have guessed just how far back the blood trail went, or how high up it would eventually reach. Captain Isidro Mata had once been considered a rising star in the Philippine National Police. Known for his calm under pressure and technical expertise, he was assigned to high-level intelligence units early in his career. Colleagues remembered him as quiet but meticulous, a man who followed orders and didn't make waves. That changed in 2015, when he filed a confidential complaint, questioning an off-the-books surveillance program linked to then-Mayor Rodrigo Duterte's office in Davao. Not long after, he was reassigned without explanation to a remote logistics post, effectively sidelining him from active duty. From then on he became a ghost within the system, present on paper, invisible in practice. But Mata hadn't stopped work. Unbeknownst to his superiors, he began quietly tracking the development of what would eventually become Operation Hades. He accessed internal servers late at night, cloned encrypted files, and kept a growing record of communications between field units and high-ranking officials. He saw the rise of the ECHO teams before anyone else even noticed their existence, and he recognized something that others missed entirely. The killings were not random, but timed. In the files recovered from Mata's hidden bunker, there were detailed maps covered in red pushpins, each one marking the site of a confirmed execution. At first glance, it looked chaotic, but when investigators overlaid the map with a calendar of major government events, press conferences, state visits, national holidays, a terrifying alignment emerged. The killings spiked in the 24 hours before or after every major address by the president. Each wave of death was followed by a public declaration that the drug war was succeeding. Mata's own notes on the pattern were handwritten, frantic and full of warnings. One page read, "These aren't accidents, they're scheduled. It's political theater disguised as law enforcement." In another, he sketched a flowchart that placed government offices, military liaisons, and regional police heads in a chain of command that bypassed legal channels entirely. The ECHO teams, according to Mata's research, were formed from loyalists, men pulled from Duterte's former stronghold in Davao and embedded into Manila's police force months before the drug war was declared. The most damning evidence came from surveillance photos Mata had taken himself. He had followed ECHO convoys on several occasions, capturing images of unmarked vans parked outside safehouses, hours before killings took place. In one set of photos dated early 2016, he captured men loading weapons into crates, labeled training equipment, but the coordinates in the photo's metadata showed the destination was not a training facility, but a neighborhood later hit by one of the deadliest sweeps that year. It became clear that Mata had been preparing to go public. He had gathered everything: names, dates, orders, movement. What he hadn't prepared for was how quickly the system would move once it sensed a threat. After the first video leaked, he vanished within days. No official record of his disappearance was ever filed. His bank accounts were frozen. His personnel file was redacted. To the government, Mata had become a traitor, but to the investigators now poring over his files, he was something else entirely. The first person to see the truth and try to stop it. And he may have paid for that truth with his life. Buried deep within the files recovered from Captain Mata's bunker was a folder marked with only one word: Mother. At first investigators assumed it referred to a central database, perhaps the hub of Operation Hades, but when the folder was opened, it contained just a single video file. Its name was a random string of numbers, offering no clues. But when the footage played, it became immediately clear why Mata had kept it separate from everything else. This was not another street execution. This was something far more dangerous. The video had no timestamp, but digital analysis placed it around 2014, 2 years before Rodrigo Duterte became president. The setting was an abandoned warehouse outside Davao City, the same city where Duterte had long served as mayor and had built his reputation as a no-nonsense enforcer of order. The footage was grainy, black and white, but stable, suggesting it had been filmed by a mounted camera, possibly hidden inside a ventilation shaft or light fixture. It began in silence. A man knelt on the ground, hands tied, visibly shaking. Behind him stood a group of masked. Within days, no official record of his disappearance was ever filed. His bank accounts were frozen. His personnel file was redacted. To the government, Mata had become a traitor, but to the investigators now poring over his files, he was something else entirely, the first person to see the truth and try to stop it, and he may have paid for that truth with his life. Buried deep within the files recovered from Captain Mata's bunker was a folder marked with only one word, Mother. At first investigators assumed it referred to a central database, perhaps the hub of Operation Hades, but when the folder was opened, it contained just a single video file. Its name was a random string of numbers, offering no clues, but when the footage played it became immediately clear why Mata had kept it separate from everything else. This was not another street execution, this was something far more dangerous. The video had no timestamp, but digital analysis placed it around 2014, 2 years before Rodrigo Duterte became president. The setting was an abandoned warehouse outside Davao City, the same city where Duterte had long served as mayor and had built his reputation as a no-nonsense enforcer of order. The footage was grainy, black and white, but stable, suggesting it had been filmed by a mounted camera, possibly hidden inside a ventilation shaft or light fixture. It began in silence. A man knelt on the ground, hands tied, visibly shaking. Behind him stood a group of masked men. Then someone stepped forward. At first the figure was just a silhouette, but as he moved into the light and leaned down, his face became unmistakably clear. It was Rodrigo Duterte, not a lookalike, not a blur, him years before his national campaign inspecting the man on the floor. He didn't yell, he didn't show anger, he simply stared, reached for a pistol handed to him by one of the masked men and fired a single round into the kneeling man's head. The camera didn't flinch, neither did anyone in the room. It was quiet, businesslike. Afterward, Duterte handed the pistol back, wiped his hands with a cloth, and walked away. For the investigators watching, the footage was nothing short of explosive. It confirmed every rumor that had followed Duterte for years. As mayor of Davao, he had been accused repeatedly of running so-called death squads, but no one had ever captured him in the act, until now. This wasn't just evidence of murder, it was evidence of direct involvement in a pattern of killings long before the war on drugs was launched nationally. The implications were staggering. If this video had surfaced during his presidential campaign, it could have changed the course of Philippine history. But now, years into his term, it raised an even darker question. Had the entire drug war been a continuation of a system he built and tested in Davao? And had he brought that system to the national stage under the guise of justice? The video was the kind of evidence that could not be easily denied or explained away. It wasn't edited. The background matched a known warehouse that had burned down under mysterious circumstances. The man who had owned the property had disappeared weeks before the fire. Now everything pointed to the scene being part of an early template, one that Duterte had perfected long before the cameras of the world were watching. With this clip, the story changed. It was no longer about rogue squads or broken policing. It was about legacy. The war on drugs hadn't just started in it had started in secret, under shadows, and with the same face that would later stand behind podiums and promise safety. The footage from the Davao warehouse was more than just a smoking gun. It was a blueprint. It showed that what the world had witnessed during Duterte's presidency wasn't the rise of a violent campaign, but the scaling of an already proven model. The war on drugs had been a dress rehearsal in Davao. Under Duterte's control as mayor, the city had long been whispered about as a place of peace through fear. Crime was low, yes, but so was trust in the law. People disappeared, bodies turned up in rivers, and just like in Manila years later, the killers were never caught. Once Duterte rose to the presidency in 2016, those same methods were replicated, with chilling accuracy across the country. But something more disturbing emerged from Captain Mata's files. Many of the men who led the first wave of killings in Manila were the same individuals who had served in Davao's local enforcement teams years earlier. These were not randomly assigned officers or local police acting alone. They were hand-picked, transferred quietly from Davao to key posts in Quezon City, Caloocan, and Pasay. Travel records, police rosters and internal memos showed that nearly 24 operatives from Duterte's Davao task forces had been reassigned just weeks before the national drug war began. Their roles ranged from team leaders to logistics managers, to cleaners tasked with covering up evidence. Each had a clean disciplinary record. Each had signed confidentiality agreements. In one file, an officer's transfer request simply read, Operation Echo, approved by PR. The war on drugs wasn't born in the chaos of rising addiction or lawlessness. It was imported, refined and executed with military precision. Echo teams were divided into small agile units that operated in cycle. They worked in silence, under the radar, using methods that avoided media attention. Each hit was planned with a twofold goal: remove the target and send a message. The cardboard signs, the public display of bodies and the lack of due process were all part of a formula designed to instill terror. Mate's logs included detailed timelines showing how major national events, State of the Nation addresses, Senate hearings, international visits, were always preceded by a spike in killings. These deaths were not just collateral damage, they were symbolic, meant to reinforce the president's narrative that the country was under siege by drugs, and that only iron-fisted action could save it. One particularly disturbing document was a PowerPoint presentation used in an internal training session for Echo team leaders. It outlined best practices for rapid neutralization, advised against body cams, and listed the ideal time window for strikes between 2:00 and 4. There was no mention of justice, rehabilitation, or prevention, only control. As the scope of the operation came into focus, investigators understood something terrifying. This wasn't a malfunction of a justice system, it was a fully operational machine of political violence. The masked men weren't freelancing, they were following a manual, one written years before the public ever heard the phrase war on drugs, and at the center of that manual was the same man whose face had appeared in that warehouse footage, calm, silent, and, while the violence carried out by the Echo teams was brutal, it wasn't fueled by ideology or duty alone, it was funded. Every bullet, every silenced pistol, every blacked-out van cost money. The more investigators dug into the files Captain Mate had left behind, the more they began to uncover a money trail that stretched far beyond police budgets and government salary. Behind the scenes of the killings was a network of shadowy contracts, fake companies, and payouts that connected the blood on the streets to the pockets of powerful men. It started with a company called Alfaro Holding. On paper, it was a modest security contractor, specializing in surveillance technology and private guard services. But Alfaro's financials didn't add up. From 2016 to 2018, the company's government contracts ballooned from. Most of those contracts were marked for community protection infrastructure, a vague category that often included surveillance drones, armored vehicles and tactical gear, but physical checks of the sites supposedly equipped by Alfaro showed little to no upgrade. Money had been paid out but not for what was promised. The name on Alfaro's registration documents was Ronaldo Lopez, a former bodyguard of Duterte during his time in Davao. Lopez had no background in business before, yet after Duterte's election he suddenly became the director of 3 companies, all of which received fast-tracked government contracts. Investigators found links between Alfaro and several known Echo operatives, including payment records listing monthly service bonuses to unlisted employees with no identifiable roles. The amounts matched the performance incentives described in the OP Haydids file. Further analysis revealed the funds came not directly from police budgets, but through discretionary allocations under the Office of the President. These special funds were meant for intelligence operations, classified emergencies, and national security projects. They were not subject to regular audit. This lack of oversight allowed massive sums to be funneled into operations with no accountability. The same funds that were supposed to protect the country were instead being used to pay for assassination. Even more alarming were the payments marked as community outreach, which upon inspection, matched the locations and timeframes of known killings. In one case, A fund $2.3 million disbursement to a logistics firm was made just days before a major sweep in Caloocan left 11 people dead. That firm dissolved 2 months later and was replaced by another with almost the exact same board members under a new name. The deeper investigators followed the money, the clearer it became. This wasn't a spontaneous crackdown, it was a monetized operation. Killings were not only sanctioned, but encouraged through financial reward, and those rewards flowed upward as well. Politicians who oversaw effective enforcement zones received campaign donations, favorable contracts, and political favors in return. Silence, loyalty, and efficiency were the real currencies. Duterte's war had turned death into a business, and business, it seemed, was booming. The line between crime and governance had all but disappeared, replaced by a network of profits powered by fear. Justice was never part of the equation. Control was purchased, enemies were eliminated, and everyone involved got paid. As investigators connected the final threads between the funding, the killings, and the involvement of national officials, something began to shift. Those close to the inquiry started to feel it first, a growing sense of being watched. It began with minor oddities, emails going missing, strange cars parked outside homes for hours, and documents that had been securely stored disappearing without explanation. Then it escalated. People started to vanish. The first was a junior forensic analyst, who had been tasked with cross-referencing ECHO team assignments with Alfaro Holdings payroll records. She didn't show up for work one morning. A week later her body was found in a hotel room, reportedly of an overdose. Her family swore she had never touched drugs. No autopsy was ordered. Her case was closed as suicide. Investigators on the team began encrypting everything, keeping backups hidden in locations known only to a few. But it didn't stop the loss. A veteran journalist, who had covered the drug war since its early days, died in what police called a hit-and-run accident. He had just finished a confidential interview with one of the investigators. A known activist lawyer, who had helped families of drug war victims, was arrested on vague charges of subversion and terrorism, then kept in isolation. Each silencing sent a message. The deeper you dig, the more you risk becoming part of the story. At night, some team members found encrypted messages on their phones. No sender, no signature, just 2 words, "Stop now." Cars began to follow them. Cameras were found hidden in their apartments. A drone hovered for 3 minutes outside one investigator's home, then disappeared into the cloud. They stopped using phones. They met only in person. Paranoia became protocol. The most shocking development came when a list was discovered on a flash drive previously believed to be corrupted. It was a target list. Beside each name was a tier classification. Some names had red dots beside them. These individuals had already been eliminated. Several were familiar. Others were marked active surveillance. Alarmingly, 3 members of the investigative team were on the list. It was undeniable now. The machine that had carried out years of secret killings was not just a historical structure. They were still active, still watching, and prepared to silence anyone who got too close. The ECHO network hadn't been shut down. It had simply adapted. Some of its members had likely moved on to private security work, others embedded deeper within the intelligence community, but the system remained. Even institutions that should have offered protection, courts, lawmakers, oversight agencies, were either silent or complicit. Requests for hearings were denied. Evidence submitted to internal watchdog groups disappeared. No charges were filed. No investigations were opened. The footage of Duterte at the warehouse, the financial records, the chat logs, none of it saw a courtroom. Not yet. The story wasn't just about mass killings anymore. It was about erasure. Erasure of witnesses, of records, of truth. The drug war had created a second war, one waged in the shadows against anyone trying to expose it. And as the investigators realized they could no longer trust anyone, they made one final decision: to release everything they had. If they couldn't win in court, they'd fight in the court of public opinion. Because once the silence is broken, even the most powerful machine starts to shake. The decision to go public with the evidence was not taken lightly. For months, the investigators debated the risks. They knew releasing the files and footage could put them directly in the crosshairs of the very network they were exposed. But staying silent meant allowing the truth to be buried indefinitely, along with countless victims. It was a gamble, but one they felt compelled to take.
they reached out to trusted journalists and human rights organizations abroad, carefully encrypting the files and sending copies through multiple secure channels. International media outlets began receiving fragments of the story, drone footage, financial records, and the haunting video of Duterte himself at the warehouse. The leak ignited shockwaves far beyond the Philippines. As the world reacted, so did the government. Initial responses were denials and accusations of fabricated evidence. State media dismissed the footage as deep fake or foreign interference. Investigators faced smear campaigns and legal threats, yet public pressure grew. Citizens took to the streets demanding transparency and justice. Families of victims, long silenced by fear, began to speak out. The leaked evidence forced human rights groups and international bodies to demand independent investigations. The United Nations called for accountability. Some foreign governments suspended aid and imposed travel bans on key officials implicated in the scandal. The Philippine government was cornered but remained defiant, vowing to protect national sovereignty and reject what it called external meddling. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Some officials quietly distanced themselves from the program. Others moved to cover their tracks, deleting files and shutting down operations. Yet the flow of leaked information didn't stop. Each new revelation deepened the cracks in the narrative.